So thank you very much, Dagfinn. I think after this speech, we all understand the importance, the pillar which the Nordic countries constitute in the Arctic region, which reminds me of a conversation I had a few weeks ago with a Swedish scientist. He told me that this pillar, the Nordic Arctic pillar, has various parts. One of them is, of course, the Norwegians that contributes to funding, the Swedes that do the thinking, the Danes that do the work, and the Finns and the Icelandic that give the tenacity to make the whole things work. So the next speaker we have is from America, Carter Roberts. He's president of WWF. He's a very interesting man because he has crossed a very difficult borderline. He was educated at the best business schools in the US. He started a very promising career in American multinationals, and then suddenly he gave it up. He went over to the other side. So he's now consecrating his life to finding ways of preserving international conservation. And I think this is something we should honor. So we're very, very happy to have you here today, Carter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President Grimson, for this magnificent gathering and the joy you bring to it. And thank you, Alice, for inviting me to be a part of it from the beginning. Not so long ago, on September 25th, the nations of the world came together and committed to Sustainable Development Goals. And lest you think that's more than a mouthful and way too many, remember that when the world set Millennium Development Goals at the turn of this century, that the world made great progress toward almost all of them, with the exception of environmental sustainability. And now, with the new version of Sustainable Development Goals, you can see the agenda that the world has put forward to provide for humanity without destroying the planet. And if you squint and look closely at the list, you can see the degree to which humanity and the planet itself, environmental sustainability, is fundamental to so many things. And this will focus the world's attention in the years ahead. Now, 3 days after this happened, Shell announced that they were pulling out of the Arctic. There are many narratives as to why Shell made that decision, from the economic one to the risk one to the environmental narratives, but it sent shockwaves through the system and reminded us of the imperative of designing development right from the beginning, lest you find yourself spending $9 billion on a project that doesn't have an economic return at the end. We are all gathered here in large part because we love the Arctic, but also because there's the opening. Shell's withdrawal does not signal a retreat from the Arctic. The impulse, the instinct to find ways to create values in the changing Arctic remain. And the Arctic is not the only place on Earth that has that kind of opening. We see it in different places around the world, and I wanted to share with you some stories as to how other parts of the world have responded proactively to think about what they have, lest their development path destroy what they have. To put the values on the table, whether those are cultural or environmental, and to quantify those where we can, and then let that guide the development path that happens. In the Amazon, as the world grows to 9 billion people, more and more people are turning to the Amazon and other places in the world to feed our new population with its changing tastes. In the Amazon, it is beef and soy that are at the edge of the agricultural frontier, causing deforestation. And in response to those trends, the government of Brazil asked us, among others, to map biodiversity forest carbon stocks, to understand how the forests of Brazil of Amazon, create weather patterns that deliver water to Sao Paulo and many parts of South America. And to understand those things so that we don't destroy those things unwittingly as the Amazon starts to get developed. And so in response to that, they created a very science-based network of reserves with the voices of indigenous communities firmly a part of the process, and are now designing roads to keep the Amazon, as much of it, intact. In Mozambique, a country that has been embroiled in civil war and recently more stable, it has announced its commitment to a green economy and to begin to map with us and the IFC and others the value of their natural capital, or their marine and terrestrial systems, and how they sequester carbon, provide benefits to people, provide food to people, and more. And then in Myanmar, which has opened up after decades of isolation, the president of that country and his cabinet asked us, with others, to map the value of their natural capital, whether it's data layers like this that show what intact vegetation does to secure fresh drinking water for people, or the forest stock and what that does to stabilize climate, or in the case of the far southeastern part of the country, the forests that hold great opportunities for ecotourism because they're full of tigers. Now, what's interesting in Myanmar is the equivalent of the Panama Canal is being built from Bangkok to the port of Dai Wei to save billions of dollars of shipping around the peninsula that lies to the south. And in response to these maps, the company that's constructing that road is now working with us and others in redesigning parts of it to keep the forest intact, using tunnels and bridges and contour lines to keep the tigers, keep the forest, that not only keep drinking water intact, but also sequester carbon as well. The possibilities are endless if you have this kind of data layer to work off of and guide your development path. Now, there are 30 places in the world where the concept of natural capital and its mapping has guided development. And combined with the knowledge of indigenous peoples is a powerful tool for getting out ahead of the curve. And you can imagine what this might look like in the Arctic. All the examples I've shown you are of single countries, but the complex jurisdiction of the Arctic should not be an excuse to not do the same here, to put the values on the table across the countries, to let those values guide the development path, and to be smart about it and proactive about it and set an example for the rest of the world to follow. That's what we can do in the Arctic itself. Now, we also know, as many speakers have reminded us, that the Arctic will also change because of forces outside of the Arctic. And these are terrifying. Whether it is the possibility of ocean currents changing and creating strange aberrations as a result of the melting ice, or whether it is the familiar image of the runoff from glaciers melting and the estimates that if the entire Greenland ice sheet melts away, that we lose this much of the state of Florida. The future of the Arctic is very much bound up with the future of the world, including, last but not least, the melting of the permafrost, the erosion of the permafrost, and the potential release of methane, which is 30 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. All of these things suddenly tip the scales where the Arctic is not just the victim experiencing the effects of climate change, but the Arctic suddenly becomes the driver of climate change in a powerful way. And so all eyes are now on Paris. And it is very important that Paris is a success. And with 160 countries coming together to put targets on the table all signs point to Paris being much more successful than the Conference of Parties that preceded it. But we also have to remember that Paris will make a huge step forward, but will not entirely solve the problem. I look forward to celebrating the success in Paris, but we should keep our eye on the prize, that if you look at business as usual projections at the top, what the current commitments that are on the table might deliver in blue, what Paris promises to deliver, it will take a huge bite out of the problem. But make no mistake that there is still work to be done. And beyond Paris, we will also need ongoing collaboration between governments and in the private sector, and to invent new ways to meet the needs of humanity while reducing the impacts that we see on the Earth. And that is why I love the Arctic Circle, is because it is a great counterpoint to the Arctic Council. It brings together an incredible array of interests that can invent new ways to get after a problem together. And in conclusion, if I think about the possibilities here, I want to make just a small set of points. One is, as in all places in the world, you need to look at the whole system through mapping, through understanding, through knowledge, through science. Look at the whole system and let that guide your decisions. We need to blend finance with scientific knowledge, with cultural knowledge, and also with innovation and proper governance. The Arctic Council, the other governmental bodies are essential to putting in place agreements and commitments to do what other countries have done before around the world. And finally, the idea of supplementing the opportunities for financial capital with the knowledge of natural capital, to manage risk upstream and be smart about it and do it right. Now, if you think that's hard in the context of the Arctic, think about this. If 160 countries of the world can come together in Paris and deliver targets to solve climate change, why can't the Arctic nations come together and plan for the Arctic as a whole and take the right steps? If China and the US can make a commitment toward climate change together, anything is possible. So, my challenge to us is to think with two hats on. One is do the right thing in the Arctic, and then for all of us to go home and make sure Paris is a success, and then double down to make even further gains beyond Paris. Now, lest I come across as the priest muttering in the back of the lifeboat about the future of the planet, I want to remind us all of the glories of the Arctic. I had a chance to see Iceland in the past 2 days. And the Arctic, and this is borrowing images from one of our council members, Florian Schultz. The Arctic is a glorious place, full of values that are natural, values that are cultural, the connection between humanity and the wildlife that is there, the incredible species there, the peoples, the places. All of this should remind us not only how much the Arctic needs us, but also how much we need the Arctic. Thank you very much.